Now that it's been over 2, 3, 4, almost 5 months since Silksong's more than successful release, I figured now would be a great time to talk about my current hyperfix addiction, Hollow Knight Silksong, or more specifically, Silksong speedrunning. Of course, the game is still relatively new, but for the most part, major speedrun discoveries have toned down quite a bit, and routes have become a lot more solidified. So, I figured now would be a great opportunity to talk about one specific speedrun route that is so absurdly difficult that most of the community has straight up written it off as a viable option. But if it were to be successfully run, it would absolutely be the fastest route in the game. So sit back and relax while I tell you about the most forbidden Silksong speedrun. Now, this run is by no means actually forbidden. There are no rules set in place preventing runners from running it. That being said, this run has built up quite a reputation within the community for being so difficult that most runners are straight up refusing to run it. In order to understand what makes it so difficult, I first think we need to go over the current routes for the any percent category, with a bit of the route's history along with it. In this first route, the Bells route, runners essentially play the game as intended, hitting all 5 bell shrines and fighting the last judge in the blasted steps in order to make it to Act 2. And in the next route, the Mists route, runners don't do that, and instead traverse through Sinner's Road and then the Mists, fighting Phantom for the alternate way into Act 2. What's crazy is that both of these routes were actually really close in terms of timing. So early on, runners were actually running both routes with no clear indicator of which one was actually faster. This was until the community conducted an insane deep dive into how the maze in the Mists actually functioned in the game's code. With the bulk of the research spearheaded by the community member Oxborox, he created both a Google Doc and video guide to explain all of the findings, and ways that speedrunners can abuse these mechanics to reduce the RNG factor of this area. Side note, if you're interested in trying to speedrun Silksong at all, I highly recommend you watch this video. Even if you don't end up running this route, it's still a really, really well-made video, and I can't recommend it enough. So I'll put a link in the description for it, so yeah, go watch that. Smile. Anyway, the Mist is still an RNG area, which is not great for speedrunning. And not to mention, the Wraith enemies found here are mad annoying as they fly through walls, drain your silk, and of course, double damage. And to make matters worse, the further and further you progress through the Mists, the more frequently they spawn in the rooms. And so by the time you reach the final room, you're trying to run through and all you can hear is fun. Despite being the fastest time, the Mist had a pretty mixed reception by speedrunners. Some runners didn't really care that much, while others absolutely hated it. Unfortunately, the Bells route was still quite a bit slower than the Mists, mainly due to the blasted steps taking quite a bit of time to traverse through, and this Bell Shrine in Greymoor taking a really long time to reach. You see, in order to reach this shrine, you need to use these balloons to pogo your way up to the Bell Shrine. However, in order to unlock the balloons, you first need to fight in the Craw Arena, which just takes way too much time. But these Mist haters, they were determined. They would find a way to make the Bells route faster. And they did. First, 2 major skips were found in the blasted steps, making traversal through it way faster. And second, a skip was discovered in Greymoor to reach the Bell Shrine without fighting in the arena. Now, these skips are pretty annoying and difficult, especially the Craw Arena skip. But regardless of the difficulty though, these discoveries were enough to make the Bells route the new fastest route. Even with the most optimal Mist RNG, getting the perfect room, the perfect butterflies, and the perfect race spawns, the Bells route was still theorized to be faster by about 20 seconds or so. And after the first sub-hour run was completed by Nebula, most top runners ended up switching over to the Bells route pretty quick. Of course, not everyone switched over. Plenty of people were still running the Mist route. Some didn't want to commit to learning a new route just yet, or others just enjoyed the Mists more. And there was even a small group of runners that were picking up a nearby item in Sinner's Road, before entering the mists, hoping that the damage boost it provided was enough to make up for the time difference. And there were even some alternative early game routes that you could take that forced you through the mists. See, while I only mentioned 2 major routes for reaching Act 2, there's also quite a few different routes in the early game as well. But how does a route in the early game force a player to travel through the mists? Well, remember those skips that I mentioned earlier that made the Bells route faster than the mists? Well, there's one key ability that makes that even possible, and that ability is the Drifter's Cloak. Without this ability, these skips are not possible, which is why the Cloakless routes are forced through the mists. As the name suggests, these Cloakless routes are early game routes that's right, don't get the Drifter's Cloak ability. Once again, there's only 2 different routes here. First is the Key route, where players farm for 500 rosaries in order to buy the simple key in Bone Bottom, using it to then traverse the Wormways for early access to Shellwood and the Cling Grip ability. And then there's the Flea route, where runners rescue 5 different fleas in order to travel with the Flea Caravan, fast traveling straight to Bellheart, and they have the added benefit of getting the Flea Brew. Now, the problem with these routes is, of course, you can't float, which isn't actually that bad, but it definitely does increase the difficulty of the game. And considering that Silksong is already a pretty difficult game, this is enough to deter some runners from straight up not running these routes. And to make matters even worse, these routes aren't even viable anymore. Kinda. Let me explain. You see, there's this one area in the Underworks where instead of using this updraft to float up to the door, players noticed that one of the walls had a hitbox with just enough room for Hornet to attach to, allowing her to wall jump off of it, letting you make it up without the cloak. This was unfortunately patched out in the first patch of the game, meaning the cloakless routes are only possible in the release patch of the game. Now, this isn't necessarily an issue. You are allowed to speedrun on any version of the game. But for those of you with elite ball knowledge would know that this very same first patch of the game also made the game significantly easier by removing a lot of sources of the notorious double damage. And not to mention, without the cloak, for whatever reason, you can't buffer your wall jump inputs, which leads to these really awkward wall jumps. So, if you want to run the cloakless routes, not only do you have to run the game without one of the most useful abilities, but you also have to run on the hardest version of the game. And it's especially brutal in some of the more platforming heavy areas such as the Cogwork Core, as without the cloak, making mistakes becomes way more common, and you get punished even harder as you lose a whole 2 masks of damage. Now here's the thing, these routes are faster. Quite a bit faster as well, with the key route saving almost up to 3 minutes over the bell route. But due to the large spike in difficulty, most runners stuck to the bell route. But as time goes on and runners get better, you would expect more people to turn over to these harder routes. And a decent amount already have, as more and more runs on the release patch of the game have been submitted to speedrun.com. Of course, it's still nowhere near as many as the other patches though. But we're not done yet. Because what if I told you that there's still a route out there that pushes the difficulty even further? So much further, in fact, that only a few have dared to even attempt it as a viable run. That's right. After 8 minutes of rambling, it's finally time I tell you about the forbidden speedrun route. Do you remember back when I said that when the bell route became faster, there were still a few odd runners taking the mist route? With one such group picking up a certain item with the hope that its damage boost would be enough to keep the mists as the faster route? Well, you see, that item is the barbed bracelet. Because the cloakless routes are forced to go through the mist anyways, well, why not pick up the barbed bracelet? If people were picking it up to make the mists faster so that it would compete with the bell route, well, it's still there. Why would you not just pick it up? I mean, like I said earlier, it increases the nail damage. More damage equals faster fights, which equals faster time, which is good, right? Yes, it is. It's great. Except I kind of forgot to mention something, and that's that the barbed bracelet actually has another side effect to increasing your nail damage. It also doubles the damage that Hornet takes. So all that juicy pre-nerfed double damage now ends up dealing quadruple damage, leaving Hornet at a fat 1 HP. So if you weren't happy enough with your wall jumps and falling into double damage cogs in the Cogwork Core, well now falling into those double damage Cogwork Core cogs will leave you at a big ol' 1 HP. So have fun with that. And you want to know what the worst part about it is? The barbed bracelet doesn't even increase your damage by that much. For whatever reason, in the game's code, it advertises that the barbed bracelet should increase the damage by 1.5 times, but in-game, it only boosts the damage by 1.25 times. So let's stop here and do a quick little math break. In most any percent categories, you only pick up the first needle upgrade right after killing Widow. This increases Hornet's base snail damage from 5 to 9. That's a pretty significant increase, it's almost double. And it's not until this first needle upgrade when you would actually pick up the barbed bracelet. So if we take our base needle damage of 9, increase it by 1.25, that gives us a big old needle damage of 11. That is an increase of 2. That's 2 less damage than just getting another needle upgrade, which would increase base damage to 13. So at this point you might be thinking, wow, this sounds horrible. Why would you want to run this? And that is a great question. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to subscribe and hit the No, it's because in theory, it still is more damage, and in most cases, it's enough to reduce the amount of hits that it requires to kill an enemy by 1, which is quite a big difference. And of course, extra damage on boss fights really adds up over time, allowing for some pretty significant time save on most of the boss fights in the later game. Not to mention, Barbed Bracelet also affects the damage done by the Clawline ability, which allows for some crazy combat. Like, dude, look at this. Look at this. This is so cool. Now, the issue, of course, is that this is all just in theory. In practice, you usually have to play quite a bit safer because, you know, you're pretty much one-shot the whole time. For example, you'll be fighting Trobio and one of these stupid balls comes out of nowhere and it like just barely touches you and now you're at 1 HP and the fight just started and now you have to use your Silk to heal, but the problem is that it takes 2 whole heals in order to fully heal because your heal only heals for 3 health and you're down 4 health, so even if you heal once, if you get hit again, you're still going to die because 4 damage, you're gonna be dead. So you gotta heal twice, and those 2 heals could have went to 4 Silk Spears, which is like 108 damage that you're missing out on. And it's like, so yes, it is technically faster. It's just so unbelievably difficult that nobody in their right mind is actually going to run this. But it's okay, because there is still hope. You see, like I mentioned earlier, in the game's code, it advertises that the Barbed Bracelet should do a 1.5 damage increase. So most people are assuming that this 1.25 damage increase is actually just a bug, and that the Barbed Bracelet will be buffed in the future. Except it won't even matter because you're still running on the release patch, so even if it does get buffed, it's not buffed on the release patch, so it's still just the damage version, so it doesn't even matter. Okay, look. This speedrun really isn't as forbidden as I originally mentioned, but realistically, even if you were to play perfectly, the estimated amount of time save is estimated to be only around 10 seconds or less. It's difficult to get an accurate estimation, but with how perfect the run has to be for only a fraction of time save, it's just not worth it. And while there were some runners trying to use it in the past, one big example is My Pet Cactus. Scene even ran it at Games Done Quick for the Silksong showcase, shout out my goat, and even myself. But now, to my knowledge, no one is running this anymore. Now, there might be someone out there that's running it that I just don't know about. If so, hi, what are you doing? But to my knowledge, I don't think anyone is anymore. At least not in the any percent category. Anyway, if you made it this far into the video, thank you very much. That actually means a lot to me. I put a lot of work into this, so yeah, that really does mean a lot. And yeah, if you like the video as well, feel free to like comment something silly, and subscribing is also nice, but like you don't have to do that. I post once every year. Don't expect more from me. No, that's not true. I do want to try putting out more stuff, but it's difficult, so if you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate it. But if not, that's okay. Anyways, I don't know how to I don't really know how to end a video, so it's just gonna like stop.